Hello, my lovely little gemstones. It's Saphira, and today I'm going to be reading Chapter 2 of Disney and Deceit, written by myself. Chapter 2, Deceit in the Bathroom. Deceit didn't want to answer the door when he heard the knock. He was still nursing his face. He'd cleaned it off and made sure the bleeding stopped before laying on his bed, but it stung horribly. He flung himself to his feet, opening the door and not attempting to hide his frustration. "What do you want, Roman?" Roman stood tall, his shoulders back and hands clasped behind him, and he looked Deceit in the eyes. It was almost enough to distract from the fact that he was fidgeting and his heart was racing. "I want to apologize to you. I never should have come into your room without permission, and Roman, stop." The prince swallowed at Deceit's flat tone. He did his best to not flinch. "But I truly am sorry, Deceit." Deceit blew out a breath. God, he sounded so pathetic. It cooled his temper slightly. "Tell me, Roman, why are you here?" To apologize? Why?" Roman bit his lip. "Well, because I came into your room without permission, and you got hurt because of it." "Oh no, not at all. I adore having my face ripped apart by someone who's been driven insane by my room's influence," Deceit drawled sarcastically, and Roman swallowed, looking at his shoes. "Yes, I know it was completely my fault for bringing him in here, and it's my fault that you got hurt, and I completely understand if you want nothing to do with me after this. But..." He sighed, meeting Deceit's eyes. "I still want to extend a proper invitation. This Friday, I would love it if you could join us for movie night." Deceit raised an eyebrow. "Us? I thought Virgil and Patton wanted nothing to do with me, even after I saved their butts." Roman winced. "Yeah, so they're a little angry right now, but I'm sure it'll work out by Friday." That was a lie. He didn't know if they would ever forgive him for what happened. Deceit didn't call him on it. "And even if they don't, it would be you, me, and Logan, and that would still be fun." Deceit watched Roman's face carefully. He was trying so hard. And for what? For him? For Thomas? Just for curiosity's sake? Deceit found that whatever Roman's reason, it didn't matter. He was rather curious too. "All right, I'll be there." Deceit closed the bathroom door quickly and leaned against the counter, inhaling slowly to calm himself down. He'd expected Virgil to explode. Hell, he'd been purposely needling him ever since he arrived to achieve that very goal. Didn't mean it was pleasant being held by your collar with a fist hovering inches from your face. Deceit sighed, rubbing at his temples to try and soothe his growing headache. How was it possible that the four of them could lie so badly and yet they never noticed? He knew why. They didn't have a sixth sense dedicated specifically to detecting when someone was lying. It had been going off practically non-stop since he'd arrived in the common room. There had only been a few blatant lies of commission, but the sheer amount of omission taking place made his head spin. Patton and Virgil were the worst of all. Even without his sense, he knew those two were up to something. There was no way they'd come around so quickly. Not with how they'd been so angry with him before. There was something going on, with Patton especially, cogs whirring behind that too bright smile of his. Deceit had caught on to it pretty much the moment he'd walked into the room, and it was worrying him. He was sure the effects of his room hadn't been permanent. He hadn't seen a single speck of gold in either of Patton's eyes when he checked. He should be perfectly fine. But there was something underlying his fake smile, something darker that Deceit couldn't quite grasp. When he'd compared Patton to Hans, he saw a shadow flicker in those bright eyes. The lying side huffed, tugging off his gloves and turning on the faucet to splash his face with cool water. He hissed as the right side of his face stung as he scrubbed at it. He glanced up at the mirror and took in his appearance. The sweater that Roman had designed was soft, warm, and ever so slightly oversized. The design itself was fitting. Roman had clearly drawn inspiration from his logo. It didn't cover his neck like his normal outfit, and it revealed his scales that trailed past his face. Deceit gently traced a hand against them, from the corner of his left eye down to his collarbone. He loved his scales, no matter what the others said. He loved how they glittered in the light, how they complemented his golden eye, how they split his body so nicely down the middle. He'd even learned to love the scar that traced from his ear to the corner of his mouth, a remnant of a time that he hadn't appreciated how he'd looked as much. He loved who he was, and it extended further than just his physical appearance. He loved being himself, how he could mold his words to make someone do as he wanted, how just his presence put the others on edge. He coveted his image as an over-the-top villain, molded from Thomas's own idea of what he should be. Yet, he couldn't help but wonder what it might be like if Thomas was different, if Patton wasn't so strongly in charge, if Deceit had been formed not as an entity stuck in the shadows, but as what Roman might classify as a light side. Deceit shook his head, throwing that thought away. That wasn't important. It couldn't happen, so there was no point in indulging that fantasy. In order to do what needed to be done, they all had to work together against him. The side took a deep breath, clearing his mind and slipping his gloves back on. Deceit stepped out of the bathroom to see the lights had been turned off and the TV was on, the opening scenes of Aladdin playing. The other four had shifted closer to each other on the sectional. Patton had his arm around Virgil's shoulders, who in turn was curled up tightly against the fatherly side. Roman was on the other side, arms stretched out against the back of the couch behind him. Logan was on the end, seemingly having been dragged by the princely side to side closer with the group. His legs were up on the table, arms crossed and his head leaning against the back of the couch. They were comfy, and the sound of the bathroom door closing didn't draw their attention. The four of them were focused on the screen and the shared bowl of popcorn in Patton's lap. Deceit sighed, standing in the darkness, watching them for a moment. Roman was humming the background music quietly, more subdued than he'd been before. The lying side couldn't help but smile slightly. The movie had to have been the creative side's idea. The snake turned around and walked down the hall, into the darkness and back to his room. He'd accomplished what he wanted to do this night. There was no point in inserting himself into their movie night. He wasn't part of the family. Halfway through the movie, Roman got up to refill the popcorn bowl that had been eagerly emptied by the four of them. The other three were asleep. Virgil's head had fallen heavy on Patton's shoulder, who in turn put his chin on top of the emo's head protectively. Logan had curled up, falling asleep with his legs tucked under him and his arms crossed. A smile ghosted across his lips as he looked over the three of them. Then it faded away as he thought of the missing side. He'd noticed Deceit hadn't come back, but he'd kept his mouth shut. The last thing Roman needed was another argument with Patton and Virgil. So he let it go. They either hadn't noticed or had been glad that he never came back, but Roman couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness in his chest. Already ideas were swirling in his head, coming up with endless ways he could feasibly invite the lying side back into their group for another night. He felt guilty. He knew it was selfish of him to accept the things Deceit told him. The compliments were like candy. They tasted good, but he knew they would rot him from the inside out if he took them too seriously. Logan would tell him that logically, the only solution is to not take it in the first place. Virgil would tell him Deceit's words were hypnotizing, and the only way to avoid falling under his spell was to plug his ears and not listen to the thing he said. Patton would tell him that Deceit was wrong, and that he should fight for honor and justice to defeat the villain. Roman leaned against the counter as he listened to the hum of the microwave and the popcorn popping. He could hear all their advice so clearly, and he knew they knew better. He was the fanciful one, the one with the outlandish dreams and wild fantasies that needed to be reined in. The others were more down to earth, so they could see Deceit for what he was, what he wanted, and what he was doing. Why, then, did the prince find himself wanting, more than anything, to speak with Deceit just one more time? Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and if you have a fic that you'd like me to check out, you can leave it down in the comments or send me an ask on my Tumblr, which you can find in the description. See you next time!